Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 23rd of September, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in today's news, I've got Diane, Rasmussen, McAdie, and Ben Rubin, who'll be joining me by video link. Now, I just want to say before we get started with the news that really we're entering an interesting theme where the UK column is working very hard to explain to people what is happening. So rather than just talking about news events, we're working hard to help explain to our audience what is happening and really how things are being done. So that's very much part of our theme in the news today. And Diane, we'll bring you in straight away because one of the things that the shadowy figures are always talking about is in the future. In the future, things will be better. In the future, we'll lead wonderful lives. But is that true? What have you got?
Well, thanks, Brian, and hello, Ben. Glad to be here today. First of all, I would like to say that we are in the present, but we have to look at the present and the past to figure out what they have told us their future is going to be at the Summit of the Future. I'm not sure that it will be our future because I'm not sure they want the rest of us to have one, honestly. So we've been talking last week a little bit. I mentioned it, and Mark Anderson mentioned it last week about the Summit of the Future at the UN, which has been happening over the last few days. There has been a question about where Keir Starmer is. Is he at the Summit of the Future or is he at the Labour conference, which is going on right now? Just before we came on the air, I saw that there was an announcement at the Labour Party conference that someone has been kicked out of the conference, actually dragged by the neck and thrown out of the conference because they were protesting about the UK basically working with Israel in relation to weapons. And so Rachel Reeves responded when the protester was kicked out. Labour represents working people, not a party of protest. So I guess working people can't protest. But back to the Summit of the Future, where regardless of where Keir Starmer is, we saw a tweet that came out a few days ago saying that he was flying over to the UN for the summit, but we're not really sure where he is. But what happened was yesterday, and we'll go back into more of the details, we go through this, that yesterday they adopted the Pact for the Future. Now, what is a pact? Well, sometimes it is for peace. Sometimes it is an agreement between people and parties. It is certainly not agreement with the people of the world. I can say that for sure. We have just a very short clip here to show what happened at the UN when they all agreed amongst themselves to adopt this pact. So isn't it lovely to see them all applauding themselves? The Pact for the Future is a 66-page document. It has several themes, and they include sustainable development, which is at the top, international peace and security, science, technology, innovation, and digital cooperation, youth and future generations, and transforming global governance. These are slightly different from what's on the slide because the pact was finally published yesterday evening, which I found right before I went to bed last night. And this was not available in public before this, but each one of these areas has actions saying, we will do this, we will do this. So they are talking about themselves. I really don't think, again, that they are talking about the rest of us. We can also see as well the closing session for the first 2 days of the summit, which were called the Action Days. And so yesterday I watched the closing session, which had several speakers, and then we'll go into the rest of the summit. But let's hear what this high-level manager, senior managing director at the World Bank had to say about the Action Days for the Summit of the Future.
I think the Summit of the Future is yet another reminder that we need to stay engaged on development. The SDGs are off track, and we cannot forget that. And so the Summit of the Future should not be limited to words. We need to encourage deeds and action. And the problem, what we are having is we need to have governments engaged, private sector engaged, and yes, multilaterals.
So in addition to the different goals that I was talking about, there is also in the pact a digital compact, which talks about how we are going to basically close in on the sustainable development goals by going faster and faster through closing digital divides, inclusion and benefits from the digital economy, an open, safe, inclusive, secure digital space. We're seeing the same words over and over again, that respects, protects, and promotes human rights, advance responsible, equitable, and interoperable data governance approaches, and enhancing international governance of artificial intelligence for the digital economy. And we also have a declaration on future generations, which says that we are going to focus on the generations that are not born yet, not those of us who are here today. So for the pre-opening session to the actual Summit of the Future, which was yesterday and today, so several hours later in the day because they're in New York, we had a video from Renee Fleming, who is an opera singer who I've actually admired for a long time, but I'm not sure I do anymore. Let's play the video from Renee Fleming, please.
During the pandemic, I found solace and healing by being outside. And I decided to create an album called Voice of Nature, the Anthropocene, to look at our relationship artistically with nature at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, compared with today in terms of poetry and music. Decided we won a Grammy that we should take it on the road. This is a song by Bjork called All Is Full of Love. And at the beginning of this fabulous Summit of the Future, I would love to remind all of us what a privilege it is to take care of this planet.
So we can see the focus on the planet, and I'm going to tie some things together here to see where this came from. So Renee Fleming, as I said, is a very well-known, famous opera singer. She said, this music begins at a time almost 2 centuries ago when people had a profound connection to the beauty of nature. Now in the Anthropocene, we see the effects of our own activity and the fragility of our environment. Nature has been so good to us, we have not been so good to nature. So this is the inspiration for the album that she released a couple of years ago, I think it was. So you can check that out if you'd like to, but I would say that the music itself is quite depressing and quite dystopian, if you ask me. So going back a bit further into a little bit deeper, I guess, into seeing what is actually going on and where all of this is coming from. We have here Earth for All, which I mentioned last week, the 22 report from the Club of Rome. And we see again the planetary boundaries framework depicting the boundaries that determine the state of the planet. So again, we see here in this, if you read into this document a bit more, there is more discussion about what the Anthropocene actually is. And so it turns out that we have entered a new epoch or epoch, depending on how you say it, of geology. And we are now, we are the dominant change within the system. It is us. And we have done more to the planet in the last few decades than the entire Earth has had happen to it in its 4.5 billion year history. Again, with the Club of Rome, if we go back into the work of Dr. Aurelio Pachai, who was one of the 3 founders of the Club of Rome, he published a book, a lesser known book than the Limits to Growth, called 100 Pages for the Future from 1980. I will have to say that it is 191 pages, not 100 pages. Already we see the title is a lie. But anyways, there's a lot of really, really shocking quotes in here, and I just want to read one. He says, Norman Myers calculates that there are between 5 and 10 million animal and plant species in the world, and that 500,000 to 1 million of them will be destroyed by human action by the end of the century. Their future is doomed, while we do not even know what future we are seeking for ourselves or whether our future may be linked with theirs. What ignorance of the rules of life! What a waste of potential resources! What contempt for the interests of posterity! What cruelty towards other creatures who also have a right to life. What a lack of culture. What an offense to true spirit of religion. What a lack of ethical principles and of respect for our very humanity. ! Wherever we make an appearance, wildlife, the heart of nature is finished. So there we have the Club of Rome founder saying that. Going a little bit closer into more recent history, I want to thank one of our viewers who pointed out to me last week in the forums that the existence of the Democracy Collaborative, and they did a series of books, academic writing. This one is the New Systems Reader, which is a project of the Democracy Collaborative. And the New Systems Reader was edited primarily by James Speth. James Speth is, as we can see, he's part of the World Resources Institute, which he founded, which is another sustainable markets initiative King Charles is patron of this particular organization, and we can see here he became the patron in 2018. And so we have all those connections once again with King Charles. Within this book, there's a chapter called Democratic Eco-Socialism. And the quote, "a real utopia," comes from another book that this person, Hans Baer, wrote. He is a professor of anthropology at the University of Melbourne in Australia. And he says here there are basically 5 points to democratic eco-socialism: economy oriented to meeting basic social needs, food, clothing, shelter, education, health, dignified work, a high degree of social equality, public ownership of the means of production. Where have we heard means of production before? Representative and participatory democracy, and finally, environmental sustainability. This organization that I looked into a bit more, where this is all based on the Democracy Collaborative, we have a lot of dystopian-looking photos on their website, and they're all about systemic crisis, climate change, and we need systemic change to fix all of these inequalities, these injustices, faith in democracy, crisis of our system, and we need a systemic solution to the systemic problem, which basically means starting everything all over again. So one of the particular initiatives within this organization is the Next System Project, which was responsible for writing the book that I just talked about. And again, we see systemic problems, systemic solutions. We need a new system. What are we going to do? And that this is basically what they are pushing all through the entire book, and mostly through socialism and related ideas. So I'll be covering this next week as well on the news. I'll be following the 79th session of the United Nations, which is going on for the rest of the week. All kinds of exciting meetings going on. And just so that if viewers want to follow along with me, if you want to have any watch parties or anything, you can watch everything on the Web UN TV, which is available to the public, either on demand or live. So I would like to welcome you to follow along with me, but I will have another report on this again next Monday, Brian.
Yeah, Diane, thank you very much for that. And of course, all of these think tanks and organisations, lots of money, unlimited money for them in the background, and they are setting the agenda that is then washing through national governments, whether it's the US or Germany or the UK. And the governments internally to their own population produce this as if it's agenda which has come out of their own meetings. So there's deception at every level. But the key bit is there's a lot of talk about the planet and nature. There's very little talk about humanity and love and compassion amongst people. So it's very deceptive. It gives the illusion that it's touchy-feeling, but not so. But what we do see coming in with this, alongside this agenda, is chaos. So Ben, let's bring you in because this is something you've certainly been looking at.
Absolutely, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me, as ever. And you are correct. One of the ways, maybe the most powerful way that they have for implementing this new system that they've designed, chaos in the nation states. Their new system requires the nation state to be destroyed. What better way to do that than to distract the population, to turn us against each other, and to do that across every sphere of society, from the economic system to our cultural system to the media and absolutely everywhere else. I'm going to talk about this gentleman today to put some flesh on the bones of what I've just described to you. This is Sir Paul Roderick Lucas Marshall. He's a British hedge fund manager. He has an estimated net worth of over £800 million. And in 2024, he topped the Sunday Times giving list, donating £145 million over the last year to various different charities. So he's a big philanthropist. It's the term that they use for this kind of behaviour. Very politically active. He was originally a member and donor of the Liberal Democrats, and he wrote policy documents for them in the early 2000s. But in 2015, he left the party due to his support of Brexit, and then subsequently donated to the Brexit campaign and the Conservative Party. And he's become one of the most powerful figures in alternative, or supposedly alternative, media in the UK, as a major funder of GB News, the owner of Unheard. He also recently bought The Spectator. I'm just bounced ahead for some reason, sorry about that. So he bought The Spectator for £100 million a couple of weeks ago, and he's also now in discussions to acquire the Telegraph. So he's building a really significant media empire on what would traditionally be called the right wing of the political spectrum. Now, he, as I said, is very, very widely known and acknowledged across the whole of the media industry. The Financial Times actually talked about him as being an enthusiastic combatant in the UK's own version of America's culture wars, which is a hideous concept because America has been torn apart by cultural conflicts over the past 20 to 30 years, and we don't really need them to be imported here. And that comparison is not least down to his supposedly devout Christian faith. So he was written about recently in Prospect magazine, which is edited by Alan Rusbridger. I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, this title. And this article came out earlier this year called The Marshall Plan. Hedge fund manager Paul Marshall is on a God-given mission to transform the religious fabric of the nation, and he has the money to do it. He goes on to be quoted in the article saying, "I'm a committed Church of England Christian." Make of that what you will. I don't think the Church of England is particularly Christian these days. And he also spoke at the LSE Marshall Institute, which is his own institute at the LSE, which was the LSE was created by the Fabian Society, who I'm going to talk about later in the show. And he said, if you care about philanthropy, you have to care about faith. Yeah. So this is the kind of direction, this is the angle that he's taking. But where does his money come from? Right? They all say follow the money. Where did this guy's £800 million fortune come from? And at least in part, it came from his relationship with George Soros. In 1997, he founded his hedge fund, Marshall Wace, with $25 million from George Soros, who he's the founder of Open Society Foundations. He's given away more than $32 billion to fund that network. He is one of the most well-known and established left-leaning globalist philanthropists on earth. His organization, Open Societies, is about opening up societies, breaking down borders, promoting mass immigration and the associated social and cultural transformation of our societies. He is a backer of Black Lives Matter, the radical Marxist organization that has really been one of the most active participants in the culture wars that we spoke about a moment ago. He also backed the International Rescue Committee, and these are just two organizations I'm going to mention. As I said, he's distributed $32 billion, so his name gets put against an unbelievable number of different NGOs and various different types of organizations. But IRC is particularly interesting to me because I've spoken about it quite a bit over the past few months. It's led by David Miliband, the brother of Ed Miliband, who's our current energy secretary. And it's very, very upfront about the fact that it is there to support refugees and integrate them into the UK. Yeah. So IRC is backed by George Soros, and they are promoting open borders. They're promoting mass migration and the integration of different populations into the UK. But hang on a minute, that doesn't make any sense because we just said that Soros backs Paul Marshall, and Paul Marshall is one of the main people behind GB News. And you can see on the GB News website that the migrant integration backed by IRC is called the migrant crisis, right? So they've got a completely different perspective on it. And they are both backed by the same man, David Miliband and IRC on the supposed left wing, and Paul Marshall and GB News on the supposed right wing, both taking very different, basically polar opposite positions on important policy areas relating to the country, and in a permanent state of conflict with each other, but they're all backed by the same man. Yeah, so we can see here we have Soros at the top. He's giving money to Miliband and to IRC on the left wing. On the right wing, he's providing money to Paul Marshall, who is GB News, Unheard, Spectator, etc., etc. And in the middle, what do we have? Chaos, chaos in our political discourse, chaos in our culture, chaos on the streets, which makes it all the more easy for a global power to implement transformational change into our society.
Ben, thank you very much. That very informative segment. And what did my brain say as you were taking us through this? And we've got Labour conference going on. It doesn't matter what conference, any of the political conferences. Where at that conference, we are to believe that the people standing on the stage, be it the Prime Minister or the ministers, are the people making policy in this country. And of course, this is complete nonsense because, as you've demonstrated, it's huge wealth and power external to politics, which is actually driving the whole agenda. And of course, people like Soros, he is just one. He's very well known, so maybe he gets more than his his fair share of bad press, but what is he actually doing? He's helping to destroy society to remake it in his desired image. So we need to watch this. But one thing we can be sure about is that these people are helping to foment wars because they regard wars as helpful to the destruction of society, and we need society destroyed before we can rebuild it. Now, I'm going to say that yesterday I was delighted to be able to host an interview with Scott Ritter and a very influential and knowledgeable former Major General in the Indian Army, General Bakshi. And this whole discussion was prompted on the back of the damage, really, that the West's clamour for long-range weapons to be given to Ukraine has caused. There are many people, I will say, off stage at the moment who are desperately worried that the war in Ukraine is about to be ramped up on a scale we can't even imagine by the West providing those long-range weapons to Ukraine. And it was on that basis that I was asked if I'd host a discussion with Scott Ritter and the General to talk about the situation in Ukraine. Now, I want to start straight away with one of the key subjects never talked about in the West, and that is the casualty figures. So here we have the Kiev Independent. Where are the figures? Well, let's see if we can highlight those for you. General Staff, Russia has lost 643,750 troops in Ukraine since February the 24th, 2022. And this number includes 1,330 casualties Russian forces have suffered just over the past day. So nothing about Ukrainian casualties, but this is the claim about Russian casualties. And if we follow through, we can have a look at another newspaper, which is fully supportive, of course, of Ukraine, the Kiev Post. Where are the figures? Well, let's bring them up on screen for you. Let's bring them center. And here is that magic figure of 643,750 casualties for the Russians. Now, I'll bring on this clip. It's very slow to play. I'll have to talk it through. It's a Ministry of Defense, a little bit of propaganda video. So I'm going to talk over it, but it says the war in Ukraine has been a costly endeavour for Russia in terms of military personnel, and there's some little cartoon men on screen. And it says that since the start of the conflict, Russia has slightly suffered over 610 casualties, killed and wounded. And it then blames Russia's mass infantry tactics, which require a constant flow of conscripts to the front. It says that military personnel payments represent 8% of federal spending, and it says the human and economic costs continue to mount. But not to worry, because UK, the Ministry of Defence, and the world is standing with Ukraine. Now, interestingly enough, the BBC a few days ago had this article where it said that volunteers were dying as Russia's war dead tops 70,000. Now, I actually discussed this figure with Scott Ritter in the interview. His estimate for Russian casualties was 100,000 dead. That was actually a minimum figure, but he said, I believe it's around 100,000. And if we put some injured figures on that, using a ratio of 3 or 5 to 1, we're up at 300 to 500,000, 500,000 men injured. That's just for Russia. But of course, if we look at the Ukrainian war casualties, then basically we'd be looking at 400 to 500,000 dead, because it's been clear that Russia has outgunned and outfought the Ukrainians to date, and therefore the Ukrainian casualties would be higher. And this means that we could be looking at well over 1 million, possibly over 2 million injured in Ukraine. And I'm going to say to the audience, these horrific figures, which the BBC and the West simply don't talk about, are modest efforts of the carnage. And then we've got to remember, of course, that this is West's proxy war, which the West is going to fight until the last Ukrainian. Now, the BBC, does it get worse? Of course it does. This has just come out from the BBC, a gloating, pathetic little article that it's checkmate for Russia as the global chess organization has instituted a ban because the Russians haven't been behaving themselves. So we've got this slaughter in the West, proxy war for regime change in Russia, and the best that the BBC can do is gloat about an international chess tournament. But this is the quality of the reporters. It's Will Vernon. He says he's currently in London, but usually based in Warsaw, Poland. If you have a look at the text, he will be talking about his award-winning journalism. Personally, I think this is just outrageous. Certainly it can't be called award-winning journalism, but he's one of the BBC multi-billion-pound team, of course, that dare not talk about the slaughter of Ukrainians in this horrific war. So where does that take us? Well, we've been getting some very interesting information from Ukraine. And one of the things that has been pointed out to us is that in Ukraine, there are millions of what are called the unheard voices. These are people who don't want Russia, but they also do not want NATO or the European Union for that matter. They just want to be Ukrainians and they want to be left alone. So I'm going to say we're going to do our best to engage with these people and to see whether we can bring some dedicated reports from people within Ukraine who are trying to speak out. But of course, this is a very difficult thing to do. We'll see what can be done. Now, as always, if you like what UK Column is doing, then please support us. Of course, you do support us by watching and sharing our material, but at the end of the day, it's the financial support which keeps us going. And looking into 2025, we want to expand, and therefore, the more people that support us on a monthly basis, the better. So if you think you can help, then please get involved. But yes, share our information and give the UK Column acknowledgement for the source, but the idea is to get out our content as far and wide as possible. So you can also help by making a purchase from the UK Column shop, and maybe as winter approaches, some of those warm hoodies might be a good idea or a present for somebody else. Have a look and decide if there's something that suits you. Now, we'd just like to say that we have been really, really delighted by the support that we've had by UK Column viewers and listeners who have decided to buy Agenda 21, Your Life in Their Hands. This has been a huge boost to us. We've had lots of really wonderful emails from people telling us how good they think this production is, and as a result, we intend to produce more of these booklets informing our audience on a variety of different subjects. So the future is that we are aiming to produce these on a regular basis, and I hope it's the sort of item that people will want to have in their hands as each new edition comes out. So do have a think about that. And if you haven't got edition 1, we'll call it Agenda 21, Your Life in Their Hands, then please get online to the website and you can make a purchase and get one of those delivered. Now, for interviews, this is for tomorrow at 1 o'clock. We've got an interview with Dr. Jenny Cunningham. She's going to be talking about transitioning children. We should have a little video clip here so that you can get an idea of what she's got to say.
That is what actually makes gender dysphoria a material reality. That a child or a young person will have hormones, either to block puberty or to go on to cross-sex hormones that will have an absolutely material effect on their bodies for the rest of their lives, and surgical interventions that make us straighten them or give them mastectomies.
So, Diane, you conducted that interview. I know that it's a really, really important interview. Would you like to say anything to the audience about how it went?
Yeah, I think it went really well. It was, for me, because the cast review is very long and it would take a long time to really understand what's going on with the whole review. So she did it still took a while, but I have a better understanding of the strengths and the weaknesses of the review. And we had some other discussion related to sex and gender as well. So I hope everyone will join us for the interview tomorrow at 2:00 and see what else we can learn from it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, the other interview that will be coming out this week is the Sunday interview, the interview that I've just done with Scott Ritter and Major General Gagan Deep Bakshi. This was a really fascinating discussion between these two men, where I was asked really to facilitate it. So most of the dialogue is between the two of them. They get into extremely interesting subjects, and at the end of it, something really special happens, and that is that Scott is asking the general whether his influence is enough to assist President Modi, Indian Prime Minister, to actually act as a go-between between Russia and the US or the West in order to stop this horrific war. And of course, it's a war which is of great concern to the Indians and those in the East as well. So stay posted for that one, which will be out on Thursday. But the other big news I'd like to give you is that we are really delighted that Sonia Poulton is going to join us in Bristol on the 19th of October for our UK column on location. And so if you haven't got a ticket, we have still got a few tickets left. But if you haven't got a ticket, then get online, make that purchase. Not only would the UK column team love to see you, but also we've got some really great speakers. And yes, it is really lovely that Sonia Poulton is going to join us. So, Diane, let's bring you back on screen. And, well, we're into this terrible subject of trans.
Fortunately, Brian, I think it's important to look at what's going on in Scotland in particular, just to say that the Cass Review specifically was written for NHS England, or a commission through NHS England by Dr. Galson Cass. So I want to look separately at Scotland. So the Mail reported last week that just in the past year, there's been more than 350 children as young as 7 referred to the Sandyford Clinic, which is the gender transitioning clinic in Glasgow. I would say, I guess as well, a little bit of good news, but still not great, that following the Cass Review, the NHS Scotland has considered that it will only offer gender transitioning services to children with the referral of a clinician, so that I think essentially children or parents can't refer the children to the clinics, which isn't great, but I guess it's something. The Right Decision Service, which is part of NHS Scotland and supported by the Scottish Government, posted this very recently. This is a Standard 10 gender identity services for young people. So there's a whole document that is separate in Scotland that doesn't affect England or Wales or Northern Ireland around gender identity services for young people. And the Right Decision Service is a source of digital tools that enable people to make safe decisions quickly and on the go. So we've got to make our decisions quickly and with the use of digital tools. I'm sure Debbie Evans would have some things to say about that. I want to also highlight the work here of Kate Deeming, who is on Twitter as Sunrise Dances, who's a colleague of mine who also is on the Scottish Union for Education Board. And she's doing some great work leading parents and concerned parents around these issues. And so she's got some tweets up about books related to transgenderism and so on. So we've been working together on this project with me as a librarian and her as a concerned parent of a child in the schools in Scotland around books, and basically saying there's no age rating on content. And so we had some Twitter discussion about that over the weekend. So some books that she highlighted and things that I found myself, I just want to ask some questions using these books. Queer, A Graphic History is a graphic novel. It's throughout Scottish schools. You can find it in school libraries. And if we look down there at the bottom, there's a little, at the bottom, it mentions things like trans species and different things that we want to look at: trans species, transgenderism, trans in general. At the bottom, it's probably a bit hard to see, but it is there. One of the books that I found as well when I was looking over the weekend, and I got it through Amazon, the Kindle Unlimited service that I have. Luckily, I didn't have to pay any extra to see this bit of a picture book, which is called The Boy Who Wanted to Be a Deer. It is a picture book recommended by the publisher for children ages 5 to 12. And if we read the story, we see that the boy had questions about who he was. And if we go, I've got a couple of screenshots from the following pages on the next slide there, where we can see at first he talked about being a boy and he thought he was a deer and he was bullied and kids were mean to him. So then he went back to being a human being and he felt better because he was no longer bullied, but he still didn't feel like himself. And so by the time he grew up to be a man, he was no longer afraid to be a deer. And then we see him transitioning back into being a deer. And the book kind of concludes with him being happy and wonderful and excited that he can now be who he really is. And he no longer cared when people made fun of him. So we're seeing this trans species agenda, which is it's just as bad or worse as the transgender agenda. Now we're telling children that they can be other species. And we saw this last week in Scotland, and this was confirmed by the council. This was not a myth. There's been a lot of myths going around. Oh, it's not true that kids are identifying as cats and bringing litter trays into school. Well, this one was confirmed by the council. A secondary school pupil in Scotland has been allowed to identify as a wolf. And we now see what we are calling, instead of not only gender dysphoria, we have species dysphoria. And they interviewed a psychologist. If you go further into this Mail article, the psychologist said that, of course, there is no such thing as species dysphoria. The council said that they follow the Scottish government guidelines, which is called Getting It Right for Every Child, which is part of the guidance that's again separate in the Scottish government. And they use as the basis for a lot of this the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, which says that a child has the right to be an individual just the same way everyone else does. And therefore, we can't potentially even try to direct them otherwise. If they think that they're going to be a deer or a wolf or something else, then that's their right to do so. And we should support them and be supportive of what they want to do. We see a lot of this on TikTok. There are groups on TikTok with people called Therians, where people who identify as different species and they wear masks to make themselves look like they are something other than a human being. They don't necessarily believe that they can change physically, but that in their minds they are actually at least part or whole a deer or a wolf or a dog or a cat or whatever. So I have a short clip here. It's a bit funny and dark at the same time. This is a media personality based in Texas. His name is Alex Stein. And this was something that he did back in 2022, or part of what he did back in 2022 at the Plano, Texas City Council meeting, which actually is the same town where I went to high school.
Listen to the new mask policy at Bowman Middle School. So I go in there and I put on my typical mask, and they said, oh, that mask is inappropriate. It's too distracting. Let me ask you this, Mayor Munz, please explain to me how this mask at all is distracting when I'm literally trying to protect these kids from COVID, okay? And they're trying to say that this mask is inappropriate. Sorry, my husband, he's gonna get so mad if I'm speaking in my human voice. He's gonna make me sit in the kennel all week. But they're trying to say that this mask is inappropriate for students. I'm trying to protect myself from COVID. I got 5 vaccines, but everybody knows a vaccine is not enough, all right? So I'm out here, I'm barking every day. And these students, I'm trying to bark at these students, I'm trying to teach them something. I want them to learn. I want them to know that we live in a world of inclusivity and we need to be more inclusive.
So it's funny and dark at the same time. It's a whole 5-minute video. If you want to see the entire thing, the whole link will be in the show notes. But I didn't really know exactly how to demonstrate exactly what this community of Therians or furries, which are these people that identify as something else, that's how they're describing their identity. And you can see videos of it in real life. But I thought we should add a bit of humor to it to make it a bit less dark. Brian.
Yeah, Diane, we can laugh at it, but this is a calculated madness which is being thrust on society. It's particularly targeting children because, of course, if they can destroy the minds of children, then the adult is gone. The emerging adult is already gone. But Ben, let's bring you back because, of course, we've seen the seeds for this deliberate destruction of communities and society coming over a great many years. And you've been watching at least one of the key organisations very closely.
Indeed, I have, yes. And what we're talking about here is the Fabian Society and this concept of woke fascism, which I spoke about the first time a couple of weeks ago, which is, I believe, this emergent ideology that is driving the political classes, not just in this country, but also further afield, and really sits behind this global agenda that's currently rolling out. Now, just to define those a little bit more clearly, woke means intersectional Marxism, and fascism is the integration of the market and the state. I call this an unholy alliance between power and money, and I believe that this is what Fabianism is. Right? This is what I believe that this doctrine is. Now, we're going to explore this a little bit more with some real-life examples from the current Labour government, some of the people in the ecosystem surrounding it, in particular today looking at David Lammy, who has been on the column quite a bit over the past week, and for good reason, because he's doing some very interesting and concerning things right now. Let's have a look at this from the woke fascist perspective. We're going to start with woke. And David Lammy is a founding trustee of Black Equity Organisation. You can actually see him on the left-hand side there on the front page of their website. They have a tribute to him on their people page saying that he's currently serving as our country's foreign secretary. David was one of BEO's founding trustees with a strong vision to deliver a better lived experience for Black communities. Lived experience is neo-Marxist language. And we look forward to his ongoing support for the organisation. We're very grateful for his support and the commitment to BEO's mission. What is their mission? Well, it's equity. Well, what's equity? Because it's different to equality. What is the difference? Equality means every person, group of people, or segment of society gets the same opportunities, resources, and support. But equity goes further. People with different circumstances, those who have been historically marginalised and oppressed, for example, receive varying levels of opportunities and support, so they are able to reach an outcome equal to others. It levels things up. Equity can only be delivered by a totalitarian state. There is no other way for that system to be administered. So they use these words to paint a nice, friendly picture about what this system is there to do. But in order to actually deliver it, it requires a form of totalitarianism. Right? Also, as an aside, and this is for any Afro-Caribbean people watching this, I just refer you to this quote from Benjamin Disraeli, the two-time Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. London is a modern Babylon. I'll leave that with you. Now, we've looked at the woke side of things, the Marxist side of things, and let's have a look at the fascist side of things, because it's an integration of both of those things. Last week, or maybe the week before, I think Mike spoke about Lammy's speech at Kew Gardens, where he was talking about his foreign policy, which basically involves putting the UK at the centre of a reinvigorated climate fight. It's all about international development funds and basically stimulating a market demand for British technology companies to go overseas and to make money. That's what they're using the Foreign Office for. And who's guiding this policy? Well, it's not actually David Lammy. He's outsourced a review of impact funding from the Foreign Office to a lady called Naguère Woods, who is the Dean of Oxford Blavatnik School of Government. And she's leading an expert review for UK government on strengthening global impact and expertise. Let's have a little bit more of a look at Naguère Woods. So she says here, it says here, David Lammy appointed her. He's appointed her to lead this review. She's obviously very excited about this. She says it's a privilege to chair the Global Impact Review of the Foreign Office and contribute to refreshing and strengthening the UK's approach to foreign policy and contributions to international cooperation. She isn't just a professor at Oxford. She's also on the board of Arup, Rio Tinto. She's on the Trilateral Commission for Europe. And amongst many other positions, she's also a member of the World Economic Forum, where she delivered these remarks in 2023.
The good news is the elite across the world trust each other more and more, so we can come together and design and do beautiful things together. The bad news is that in every single country they were polling, the majority of people trusted that elite less. So we can lead, but if people aren't following, we're not going to get to where we want to go.
So that is where our foreign money has been sent to, essentially. Like that's who's auditing how our international development funds are spent. She believes she's part of an international elite. Luckily, she doesn't think that the international elite are doing a particularly good job and that people aren't following them. And so there's certainly some hope out there in the world. So that's the fascist side of the system. The World Economic Forum, where those marks were delivered, is a public-private marketplace. That's the dictionary definition of fascism. And all of those things, Marxism and fascism, coalesce around Fabianism, the Fabian Society. And David Lammy, who we've been talking about, is a member of the Fabian Society. He delivered some remarks to them. Oops, sorry, let's jump ahead again slightly. He delivered some remarks to the Fabian Society back in January. This is from David Lammy's personal website. He says, "Friends, I want to begin by thanking you all. From the very beginning of our party, the UK Labour Party, the Fabian Society has been there. All Labour, as an aside, all Labour Prime Ministers have been members of the Fabian Society, by the way." Continuing with the statement, "From the intellectual heft of Beatrice and Sidney Webb to the Fabians in Ramsay MacDonald's first cabinet, from the part you played modernising Labour in the 1990s to the support you've given today's Fabians, Keir Starmer, myself, and much of the shadow cabinet, I think it's about half of the shadow cabinet, the Fabian Society has always been wise enough to know that political ideas only have real value when they can be put into practice. This year, Keir Starmer's leadership means we have our best opportunity in a generation to turn our ideas into change as the UK goes to the polls in this bumpy year of elections around the world." All right, so this is one of the, at the time he was a shadow foreign secretary, now a foreign secretary, one of the great offices of state, basically describing the fact that the Fabian Society has penetrated the very top levels of the Labour Party pretty much since its inception. How else does it play out? Well, Gordon Brown, he's a member of the Fabian Society. He's doing a very odd hand signal there. I'm not sure what that is. Talking to the Scottish Fabians. Gordon Brown was actually appointed to the board of the Rockefeller Foundation earlier on this year as well. So you can see how that global agenda aligns with the Fabian agenda. And he's also been tasked with rewriting the British Constitution. You know, these are no small task for an unelected individual who never won a general election as Prime Minister. And he's delivering this on stage. This was back in 2022, sitting alongside Keir Starmer. So they are essentially working in very close coordination with each other around this international agenda, a lot of it being mediated through the Fabian Society. And let's, of course, not forget Brown's, I want to call him Brown's sidekick, but it's probably the other way around, wasn't it? Tony Blair. Anyway, the arch Fabian. You see him there in front of the Fabian stained glass window, and let's have a little listen to Tony Blair's vision for the future of the country.
I am constantly saying to my own party, Labour Party, which will probably win this election, you've got to focus on this technology revolution. It's not an afterthought. It's the single biggest thing that's happening in the world today of a real world nature that is going to change everything. Leave aside all the geopolitics and the conflicts and war and America, China, all the rest of it. This revolution is going to change everything about our society, our economy, the way we live, the way we interact with each other. I think we're living through a period of massive change, right? This is the biggest technological change since the Industrial Revolution, for sure. How do you use it to transform healthcare, education, the way government functions? How do you help educate the private sector as to how they can embrace AI in order to improve productivity? I mean, this is a huge agenda for a government and a really exciting one. You know, people get a bit depressed about being in politics because you get all this criticism. People certainly in the West feel society is not changing fast enough and well enough. And I say, no, it's a really exciting time to be in politics because you've got this massive revolution that you've got to come to terms with.
And how is that revolution being delivered? Well, the Fabian Society are at the Labour conference up in Manchester this week, and we can see just a few items from their agenda for the week. The future for science, innovation and technology delivered in partnership with Meta. So they're working directly with Facebook, one of the big tech companies, which is just riddled with scandal and poor business practices. Who else is there? Well, they're talking about the future for the economy and growth in partnership with Lloyds Banking Group, which is a World Economic Forum partner. And Lloyds Banking Group are also sponsoring the Fabian Society reception, which is probably going to have the worst DJ battle in history between Andy Burnham, Mayor of Manchester, and Steve Rotherham, Mayor of Liverpool. So, yeah, make of that what you will. That's on tonight if you're in Manchester and you want to head down and have a little bit of a laugh. So anyway, just to sum up, woke fascism. woke, intersectional Marxism, fascism, integration of market and state, an unholy alliance between money and power, aka Fabianism, basically running the country right now.
Ben, thank you very much for that. I'm just going to say to some of our audience, people are saying that what's coming out of the mouths of these individuals is rubbish and nonsense. Depressing, certainly depressing. But of course, we need to understand the words coming out of their mouths, because it's only by understanding what they're saying that we can understand what they're doing and how our society is being destroyed around us. So don't dismiss the words. Pay attention to what these individuals are talking about, because they're telling you what they're going to do to completely reshape your life and the life of your family. Now, one of the things that, of course, that they are especially good at, as I started the news, is war. And it's these same people at the moment that are clamouring for long-range weapons to go into Ukraine. Let's have a listen to one of the puppets, the Dutch Admiral Bauer.
Admiral Rob Bauer, NATO's military committee chair, stated that Ukraine has the right to strike deep into Russia for self-defense, as nations under attack can defend themselves beyond their borders. While countries providing weapons to Ukraine can impose usage limits, Czech General Karel Rejka emphasized Ukraine's autonomy in deciding how to use those weapons. This discussion occurs amid U.S. President Biden's deliberations on allowing Ukraine to use long-range weapons against Russian targets. Despite Ukraine's calls for greater military support to counter Russian assaults, Western leaders remain cautious about escalating the conflict. The meeting highlighted the need for military leaders to clearly communicate strategies to civilian leaders. Meanwhile, Russia warned that long-range strikes could provoke further escalation, a sentiment echoed by U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who stressed that no single weapon can determine the war's outcome.
So I didn't particularly like that video clip because of the AI-generated voiceover, but nevertheless, this is the sort of material which is circulating on the internet, and it's the sort of material that people are flicking through and believing. But what does that admiral really know about the forces controlling him, putting him in the post he's in? I suspect he knows virtually nothing, but at the end of the day, clamour for war. Let's follow through here with The Guardian, and this is just a headline which caught my attention. The West's cautious approach, this is in relation to these long-range weapons, seeks to avoid escalation in Ukraine. It may have the opposite effect. And I was interested that this is Andrei Zagorodnyuk, who I'm thinking, well, who is this individual and who is he and why is he writing for The Guardian? Well, if we get into him in detail, he's the former Ukrainian defense minister. And in the article, this is part of what he says. The fear of escalation led to significant delays in providing Ukraine with weapon systems, man-portable air defense systems, howitzers, multiple rocket launchers, tanks, fighter jets, and tactical ballistic missiles. Each of these decisions was postponed for months, some even for years. Yet when these weapons were finally supplied, none of them triggered the feared escalation. Delaying such decisions was therefore unnecessary. Although nuclear escalation might have seemed a real threat at the time, enough evidence now exists to show that many of these concerns were overcautious. So this spokesman for The Guardian wants war and more weapons, and he's not bothered about the future. He said to bring an end to this war, even through negotiations or an armistice, Putin must first experience full operational defeats. He must see that his efforts are futile and his prospects grim. Only, quote, a clear, resolved strategy from the Western coalition, one that shows an unwavering commitment to victory without restraint, can secure this cause and save the world from a much larger disaster. So we have to plough into the Ukrainian conflict without thinking and without any form of restraint if we're to avert a larger disaster. This is sheer madness. But of course, the Guardian, in putting this viewpoint across, has not been completely honest with the audience. If you click on the gentleman's name in the article, it brings you through to this header, which does say that he's a former Ukrainian defense minister and a chair of the think tank, the Center for Defense Strategies in Ukraine. So that part is there, but is this the whole truth? I don't think so. And if we do a little bit of research on him, what do we find? That he's a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council, and particularly their Eurasia Center. And so what is this man doing? Well, if you follow through the Atlantic Council, they only have one objective, and that's America's role in the world. So anything this man is peddling to the Western media is going to be fully in line of what America wants to achieve in America's best interest in the world. So The Guardian, I believe, being very disingenuous in the way that it's put this article across, but the message is never mind fear of an escalation with the Russians. Let's keep pumping those weapons in. This is a little video clip, for the Atlantic Council. Just let this run through on screen. It's part of their annual report, but you can see very closely strong allegiance with Israel, with the juxtaposed flags, not so with others. And here's Zelensky, a mainstream part of their 2022-23 report. So if we finish with the last part of the statement from this gentleman, he said that Putin is willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands more Russian soldiers, adding to the already staggering numbers of those killed or wounded, which now exceeds 600,000. But of course, what he's not talking about is the casualties to his own Ukrainian society. That is completely ignored. Now, I also discovered that in the background in the last few days, there's been this taking place. It's the plenary session of the US-UK Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction. Their leadership group has been meeting, and basically this appears to be the US and the UK working out whether they can get these long-range weapons into Ukraine without driving Russia to the point where it feels that it has to use weapons of mass destruction, or at least tactical nuclear weapons, in order to stabilize the front as close to Moscow as it already is. So very dangerous people emerging in society and Western press, not giving us the truth and the facts. They're simply giving us the political agenda from the global elite, and it has to be said from the Americans in particular. Ben, we've had a particularly heavy news today because there's some very dark things taking place in the world, but you've had a little interaction which you felt was a good place to end today's news.
Indeed, yes. I had a trip to Brixton yesterday in South London and met up with a friend of mine, and I made a little film to talk about something that happened to us while we were speaking in the cafe where we were hanging out. Let's have a listen. So I'm in South London, Brixton, and I'd just been out for a coffee with a friend of mine, a Rasta man, and we're sitting in a cafe, a black man and a white man, which is how we get described by some people, and we're having a very, very deep and serious conversation about what's going on in the country and the different layers of control from Chatham House and the Council on Foreign Relations and Bilderberg and the Trilateral Commission, and how all this stuff gets coordinated at the top level and then disseminated down through the system. Now our politicians are just puppets, and we're going in deep. And if you want to talk about these things, there are very few people better than the Rastas to talk about this stuff. Yeah, believe me, they know. They know for a long time. And we're sitting there, we're chatting away. This guy comes up to us, who must have been like South Asian, like Indian or Pakistani or something, I don't know what. And he's like, fellas, I've been sitting here listening to you talk for half an hour, and I love everything that you've just said, and I've just paid your bill for you. And I just thought to myself, what a great thing to happen. Yeah, a Rastafarian and whatever the hell I am having an in-depth conversation overheard by an Indian or a Pakistani man who then decides to pay our bill for us as a thank you for having that conversation in public. That's got to be a good thing, right? What do you reckon, Brian? Is that a good thing?
I think it's absolutely a good thing. And of course, if you hadn't have had the conversation, the man couldn't have overheard you and the bill wouldn't have been paid. So at the end of the day, it's down to individuals speaking out in society and finding other like-minded men and women. So Ben, thank you very much for that clip. We must end there. Thank you to our viewers wherever you are in the world. And I understand that we've got an increasing number of viewers in Asia. Lady spoke to me about that over the weekend. I was a bit surprised at some of the things she said to me. But if you're watching in other parts of the world, thank you very much for joining in with us. We have to finish now. If you're a member of UK Column, then please join us for UK Column Extra. Otherwise, we'll see you at the same time on Wednesday. Bye-bye.